Okay, so welcome all to Space Data Hackers for May. We're really pleased to have the bunch of folks who have joined us from the Seattle area, but also from across the globe. We've got Toronto and New Zealand represented, in addition to our the folks in our backyard. Tonight, we are going to be talking with James Burk, who's Executive Director of the Mars Society and a co-founder and director for Space Northwest, but also has come back recently from the Mars Society's Mars Desert Research Station that's out in Utah, and commanded an analog astronaut mission with all kinds of stuff that got done. And yeah, I've been seeing the posts on social media and getting really excited to hear the debrief on what the mission got up to. The pictures look absolutely amazing. And if we don't manage to exhaust James, if we manage to exhaust James before we manage to exhaust the time that we've got tonight, we can do show and tell and just talk about things that are going on. So with that, I will hand it over to James.
All right, thank you, Mike. I'm going to share my screen now.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, as Mike said, I'm with the Mars Society. We're a nonprofit space organization that's global in scope, and we operate a series of Mars analog research stations. The first one was built in the year 2001 up in the Arctic Circle in Canada on a place called Devon Island. And the second one that has been more successful in terms of number of crews and crew members is the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah. And even though I've been part of the Mars Society for 26 years, and I've been part of the support and management team of the project, the MDRS project, for over 11 years, this was my first opportunity to command a crew there. And it was a really special crew. It was made up of 7 people that were selected specifically for the roles that they had. And so I'll just kind of talk about them first. So there's me. You know, I've been a space advocate my entire adult life, and been the executive director of the Mars Society now for 2+ years. Also helped Mike and Sean McClinton and Kelly Maloney and Stan Schull start Space Northwest here locally last year, which is really doing well. Very proud of the team at Space Northwest. And, you know, I also, my career for the last 20+ years was as a software engineer and technical project manager. I worked at Microsoft. I was actually a college hire there, and left there as a senior project manager and manager of people. But now I'm with the Mars Society full time, and that's my dream job, and that's probably what I'm going to be doing long term now. My executive officer, the person that I worked with the most to plan this mission, is Aline Ducati, and she's with the European Space Agency. She's a safety engineer as well as a rocket scientist on the Ariane 6 rocket. She manages safety for the launch pad down in French Guiana, which is Europe's version of Kennedy Space Center. And she's also one of the young leaders at our French chapter, Association Planète Mars, and she's been part of that as a very long time as well. And so it was a real pleasure for me to work with her. She has the most analog experience of anyone on the crew. She was on a five-week Mars analog in the Oman Desert with the Amadi 18 crew, and she brought a lot to the mission in terms of leadership, but also her knowledge of safety and emergency procedures was very useful and helped all of the crew and taught them all a lot. Our crew biologist was Cecile Renaud, and she is a microbiologist. She's a PhD student at the University de Mons in Belgium. She's a fantastic scientist. Attention to detail was amazing. and she's also an accomplished scuba instructor. But she had several experiments with spirulina, which is blue-green algae, and some really innovative work that she did with that. And I'll talk about that a little bit, although that's not really the topic of tonight's discussion. It was so interesting, I'll talk about it a little bit. And then Julian, our crew engineer, he's a fantastic engineer. He was running around writing code and fixing things. He's an airline pilot, and so he actually is an accomplished drone pilot as well. And we had 3 different drones on this mission that we were flying around, including one that was an experimental drone from a DAPA 360 that could take VR footage. And he was a pro at everything he did. He also helped us understand our solar power system better, because he's done that professionally for 9 years. And so did a lot of work with monitoring the solar panel and the power system overall, looking at the loads we have on campus. And so, you know, fantastic engineer. Our journalist, Chris Davidson, was a true professional. She's been a Nat Geo assignment photojournalist for many years. And now she does art, and she does museum quality art pieces. And one of her areas is working with storytelling across what she calls deep time, which is how kind of time affects an area in different ways over hundreds of years. And some of the stories she's studied are cultural as well, like some of the Southwestern Native American tribes, folks in New Orleans as well. So really, really fascinating work that she does now. And she was a fantastic journalist. She wrote daily reports that we ran on the Mars Society's social media that were very inspiring and poetic. And she took hundreds of photos that were fantastic quality. And so most of the photos you see in my slide deck here are ones that she took, and they're copyrighted by her, but I have permission to use them for this presentation. Erin Kennedy is a very talented young engineer from Canada. And her experiment was called Atmosfinder. It was a wind-powered Mars exploration rover designed to search for CO2 geysers in the South Pole of Mars. These are rumored to exist and have never been captured on film or video or any digital photos. So she designed this experiment to test out the idea of sending a rover to Mars that would be wind-powered, that would sort of blow along the surface like tumbleweed over the course of a year or longer, looking for these geysers. And she did all the work for this project. She built the physical robot with 3D printed parts. You can see a lot of them there. There's every one of those orange pieces is a 3D printed custom part that she designed. She also designed a circuit board and had that printed, and she wrote all the code that this rover used. So she's just a fantastic full stack developer as well as a robotics expert. And then finally, our 7th member, Audrey, was with the University of Paris, and she was our medical officer. She had a couple of medical experiments she did measuring cardiovascular health of all of us. She also had a really innovative way to collect blood and urine samples that can be shelf stable. So you could use this in space to capture blood and urine samples over a long period of time and bring them back to Earth and analyze them. And they're on dried cards, so they can be easily stored and easily transported, unlike most ways that blood and urine samples are dealt with currently in the space community. So that was my crew. And you know, the 7 of us all had individual skills, but together we worked very well and communicated very well. And I felt like we were a crew that could live on Mars, and we were very comfortable living on Mars, and we could live on Mars for a long time. We were together for 2 short weeks. It went by very fast. We got a lot done, and we were all sad that it was over because we were working so well together. This is a partial list of all of our experiments. There's stuff we did that's not on here. I just had to, you know, optimize it for one slide. What's not on here is Chris Davidson being our photojournalist and artist in residence. We also had a behavioral study we did for University of Central Florida. But there was a lot here that we worked on. These are all the experiments we had. You can see on the far right of the table is which crew member was responsible for which experiment, and who they were working with externally. Lots of support teams. We actually started out planning this mission in 2018, Aline and I, and one of the first things we did was a call for experiments from the analog science community to get a list like this together. And the roster of experiments that we've had for the last 3.5 years changed a lot. This is the final list. There was a lot of stuff on that used to be on here that didn't pan out because of the pandemic, or just because of researchers pivoting to something better. But this is what we worked on. It's a very awesome body of work for a 2-week mission, and lots of fantastic science and engineering that we were part of for this. And we'll be studying the results of many of these experiments for months and years. I'm going to highlight the 3 experiments on this table that are in red for tonight. And so namely, those are related to the EVA enhancements we did, and the use of devices to capture data. And then another theme was trying to get to a point where we could do coordinated field science with virtual reality. So this is kind of a holy grail for me and for Robert Zubrin, and something we've been working on for 6 years. It's the idea that you could take an astronaut on the surface of Mars and scan the environment that they're in with rovers and drones, and send that back to Earth, and it would be a VR environment that potentially millions of people could access. And they could explore Mars along with that astronaut. And they could do things like maybe crowdsource and crowd vote on what are interesting areas or features for the astronaut to look at. So we've actually been trying to build our Mars VR project, which is a high fidelity digital twin of our campus in Utah, with crew training and with some other interesting features, such as the rovers and the Mars helicopter, so people can kind of learn about Mars in addition to learning about what we do in Utah. We've been taking that and steadily improving that application, and we have a new version of it that we hoped to use during our mission to plan out EVAs, and I'll be talking about that tonight. So first, let's start with this EVA monitor. So we wanted to demonstrate the capability of situational awareness with the crew that's out on EVA. So let me just back up a second and explain kind of what we do at the station. You may have seen some of the photos of people with on the crew with analog astronaut helmets on. We basically use those suits to simulate a real spacesuit. And when we're in simulation protocol, we have to put those on to go outside. So unless we are walking between the buildings on the campus, let me pull that slide back up. So you can see the buildings there are connected with those tunnels. We're allowed to walk between the buildings without the spacesuit on, but as soon as we leave the habitat, we have to wear the spacesuit. And so we usually plan those activities out in advance, and they're called EVAs, just extravehicular activities, just like what astronauts that are on the space station would do, is they put a suit on and they go outside and work on the space station or deploy a satellite or repair something. That's what you would also do on Mars. You would, to go outside and do things, you would gear up and go outside, go through an airlock. You may use rovers to get around. You may even use air power to get around. But that's what we practice at MDRS, is we practice these EVAs by putting on the gear and going outside. And so when we have a crew outside in gear, safety is a real issue because it's the desert. They can get hot. They're driving on rovers and they can get lost. We plan these things out in advance so they stay on the roads. We know how far they're going. We know how long they're going to be out. Everyone has radios, and that's how you talk to each other. Even when you're right next to someone else in a spacesuit, you still have to use the radio to communicate. So the radios have to be working, and the radio links back to the main habitat where your other astronauts are that are supporting you during your EVA. That is a really important thing to have as well. And what happens quite often on our EVA map as we leave the station and go explore the area, which is multiple kilometers, in interesting distances away, we often lose radio. And so we often have crews that are out of communication, and that's a safety issue. If someone gets hurt, we're not going to know right away. And so we were trying to show the ability to use some technology to have situational awareness of a crew out in EVA at all times. And we succeeded in doing that. We used a device called a Garmin InReach. So I'm holding it right now. It's a small satellite communicator that you can use to send text messages, but it also has your location in GPS coordinates, and you can easily transmit that to others. And so what Julian built with this EVA Monitor application is he had a Google map of the area, and he ended up overlaying what you see here, which is the official MDRS program's EVA map that has all the names of things on it. He overlaid that onto Google Maps, and then he had the Garmin data overlaid on that too. And it was about a 1 to 2 minute delay. So as we had crews out traveling in the rovers, they were wearing one of these Garmin devices, and they would automatically be sending back some positional data once every couple minutes. They also could use this device to manually send a point of interest. And we also used that to send messages. We also had that capability of getting help with this. And each of these devices actually has an SOS button on it that if you trigger it, it will contact the EMS in your county. So essentially, these devices are meant for folks like hikers and skiers that are going to be in backcountry a lot, because it gives them a permanent communications link because it's a satellite. It's not using radio or cellular signals, it's satellite based. So there's most of the time when you're on Earth, unless you have obstruction to the sky, you're going to be able to use a device like this to communicate. So this is the core of what we did. We successfully showed that using these Garmin devices and using waypoints and sending waypoints to each other, we could navigate the map. We could get over the fact that we didn't always have radio comms, and we really were able to be more effective as a crew. Our crew was in Sim for 12 days, and we did 19 different EVAs. So often we did 2 in a day, and we would rotate the crew members that were going out on EVAs so that everyone had time. Everyone got to do what they wanted to do. Everyone got to take a turn as the leader of the EVA as well. By the time we were done, all 7 crew members, I believe, had a chance to be the EVA lead out in the field. And so it was fantastic. We were able to pack a lot in. We were able to do a lot of things for the experiments that we wanted to do. For example, testing the wind-powered rover. We did 6 different EVAs for Erin to make sure that she could test everything she wanted to test in different terrain with different weather conditions. There were wind gusts sometimes that were up to 30 to 40 miles an hour, which were really helpful for her as she was testing the sails and the gimbal motors on her robot, so that we were able to do that and go out to really interesting places like the Sea of Shells, which is a lunar analog. And she was able to test the rover out there because we were able to have the situational awareness, where normally we would be a little risky about doing those long traverses. So it was really an awesome finding and insight for us that by having this Garmin system and having the EVA monitor that the crew in the habitat can look at in real time and send messages back and forth to the crew, we conquered the idea that the radio comms require you to be overly cautious and not explore a large area. This is a screenshot of the actual EVA monitor. So you can see we have all of the areas that we would normally go on the map. Here's the campus right in the middle down there. And a lot of crews would just kind of stay in that immediate 1 kilometer around the hab for most of their mission and wouldn't do some of the long traverses that we did. So we were really fortunate that we learned how to do it well and had these tools to help us stay safe as well. There's another project that was very similar to the Garmin's that we also wanted to demonstrate during our mission. And this is the longer term solution at the station. This is a device called a Meshtastic device. It's about a $30 LoRa radio that you can get. They're made in China. There's a bunch of different models, but it's an open hardware platform So there's no IP or royalties. So these are designed to be really cheap and really powerful small radios. And when you have a bunch of these together, they actually make a mesh, an ad hoc mesh network. So you can imagine having a bunch of these when you're going out on a long EVA, you can drop these like breadcrumbs and have a mesh network all the way back to the hab. And you would be able to do things like we did with the Garmin's. Like we would be able to send messages. Maybe we'd be able to have folks' heart rate or how long they've been out, data like that sent back to the hab. You could actually use a system like this if it was up and running to control a rover, the way rovers are controlled on Mars, where you send commands and then wait, and then get back some telemetry or maybe even images from the rover later on. We could actually set up a scenario like that for crews. They wouldn't have real time. It wouldn't be like remote controlling a rover or drone where you could see it. It would be more like sending commands and getting them back. But that's what JPL does with the real Mars rovers.
I think Michael's got his hand raised.
Oh, go ahead.
So, quick question. One of my projects a while back was RF transmission and reception across rugged terrain. And did you encounter any difficulties with maintaining those networks or communicate blackout areas between the hab and your expeditions, et cetera? And would it be useful to figure that out?
Oh, yes. And that is exactly what our crew was trying to do, not just with the radios, because we do have one radio repeater, like an analog radio repeater that can rebroadcast as a radio signal to a larger. We have one of those up on this north ridge here that you see north of the hab. But one of the features of going on EVAs at the station in Utah is as soon as you go up this road, this main north road, and you're you have the north ridge between you and the hab, you don't have radio at all. So we put a repeater up on that hill in the hopes that we could extend that range. But it was very sporadic. And we found that because the repeater had a 1 second delay and it was unreliable, it was sometimes better to not have the repeater in the equation when we were talking to each other, especially when it was just 2 or 3 or 4 of us locally somewhere. We wouldn't turn off the channel that used the repeater. So it was very useless for the most part. There were a couple cases where using the repeater, we could actually get a beam, an audio signal back to the hab when we were far away. Like if we were up on a ridge far away, we could do that sometimes, but very sporadically. So and it was the same issue with the Meshtastic, because that stuff also would be obstructed by hills and landforms. And there's a lot out there in Utah. I mean, there's like 7-story tall landforms right next to you. So yeah, it's definitely an issue. And we're working, one of the things we were trying to do was show how bad the situation is for radio and Meshtastic devices, to plan out doing more repeaters, doing more sort of breadcrumb type devices that we can leave semi-permanently on hills to extend the range of this network and the range of radio comms. Yeah, you're asking basically what the main issue that we were trying to overcome is for the program, not just our crew.
So we should talk. I did a hackathon for the National Institute of Science and Technology dealing with RF propagation. Came up with this thing called the RF Atlas, which shows you basically there's not enough time and the money to run an RF simulation for every point on the landscape, but there are other means. So we should get together sometime. Yeah,
sure. That would be great. So what you see on this slide is we had the Meshtastic radios. I would give one to each crew member when they went out on EVA. Even though we couldn't see this data in real time, we wanted to make sure it was getting captured, and we wanted to test the ability of these Meshtastic devices to mesh with each other and enhance the signal. And I'm happy to say that we did capture a lot of data on EVAs. Here's one visualization you can see where we've, after the fact, laid out the data points onto the map. And what's great about this versus the Garmin was only sending back like 1 data point every minute. So if you look at the line on some of these plots that we had, that's not what the crew, that line does not represent what route the crew took. It's a linear line between 2 points that were a minute apart. So clearly they were driving when that red line was connected. Versus the Meshtastic, it's literally capturing data almost constantly and sending it. We had a way for it to relay back to the hab and then get written to the cloud through a Azure-based VM that we set up. So we actually have this data that is getting relayed back and written to the cloud in real time. And then we can have other applications that pick it up from the cloud, which I'll come back to. So we were able to successfully capture data on many of our EVAs. We also had a way to capture the radio comms. So we piped in a radio by plugging it with a physical audio cable into an iMac and have a Discord server running. So we actually had the voice channel in Discord through the audio device on the Mac to the radio. So in effect, when we were talking on the radio to each other, it was going up to the Discord server and it was getting recorded by a remote support team we had. So we have, for the first time, we have recordings of the EVA traverses, not just the data of where we were, where each of the 2 or 4 people were at any moment, but also the audio that goes along with it. So we can kind of tell what was going on there. Now that coupled with footage we have from drones we took, so in some cases we would fly a drone and follow the crew on EVA, almost like an action movie chase scene. We have footage like that. We also have lots of still photography that was taken during the EVAs when they were out at interesting places. So we're hoping that we can stitch together some of these into videos that we can show that can play back an EVA and really you get the experience of what it's like to go on one of these. Because it resembles a lot what you would do on Mars, where you would go out, you'd have a team working together to stay safe, and you'd be exploring an area, or you'd be setting something up and testing that it works, or you'd be repairing something. We did EVAs to go get soil samples for the green hab experiments. This is this little photo here on the right is one of the Meshtastic devices that Peter Duckliver built in a small Pelican case with a big battery and a bigger antenna. So it's essentially a portable Meshtastic that we could leave out in the field for a week. And would still have power and it would act as a relay. So we put that, you can see, we put it up on a hill, about 100 feet up from the road with a view of the hab, right? So you can see the hab in the far middle of the horizon there. So it had a straight shot to the hab and then it had a straight shot to a pretty wide area north and east of it, which is where we were operating a lot. So we're still haven't gotten full data of how this little experiment here worked, but it's the kind of thing we hope to do by putting these repeaters up on hills, not just for the Meshtastic, but for the radio comms as well. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about now is the VR stuff. So I've got a couple of things to show. I'm just going to play this and kind of talk over it. So we've got a VR app, and what we did is we built a multi-user version of it that has the whole terrain map in it. And you can see it here. We have it sort of as a table inside the VR app that you can stand around. So wherever you are in the world using our VR app, you can kind of have a room, and you have this in the middle of the room. And we have it where people can actually walk around this. And there's a pass-through feature of the Oculus Quest headset where you can actually, there's cameras on this now, and you can actually put this on and see the people that you're in the room with. So we have this working now where we can have 4 people or more put on the headset, have the map of the whole terrain around the station in 3D in front of you, as if it was like a model railroad set. It's that detailed, like you look down at it and you see the little terrain landforms, as if they were little resin models in VR. And you can also have the astronauts that are out on EVA right now in the field represented as that little blue hexagon, because the Meshtastic data we're capturing is piped into this through the relay I mentioned before. So you can have, in effect, situational awareness of each astronaut in VR in real time. And you can see the prototype data overlay right there. And so the idea here would be that you're back in the hab, you're doing the radio to support the crews. We call that habcom. You know, instead of having the radio and the EVA monitor on the screen in front of you, which was great, you just put on your VR headset and you can talk to the team with the radio. You can see where they are on the map, and you could even click down and be on the train alongside them and like walk around with them and help them explore and like point out where they should go. So you're in VR back in the hab, but you're actually able to directly support someone out on EVA and communicate with them. And we also would like to have a way for the folks out on EVA that have the suits on with the helmets to eventually have AR glasses or something built into the helmet so that they can see the VR participant and talk to them and see their overlay. Because then you would really have the two-way communication and data sharing that would allow you to do really high fidelity scenarios, such as if you were both geologists and you were analyzing rocks, or if you were doing some type of in the field training and you needed to have a checklist with reference material, say if it was a medical CPR thing. So we're trying to enable some of these scenarios where you can have someone in VR helping someone out in the field. So we call that coordinated field science operations, or it could be remote engineering support out in the field. And you can imagine this also being used on Mars, like the scenario I talked about earlier, where you have a crew on Mars and they have everything VR enabled, and you have people back on Earth that can put on a headset and play back their EVAs and play back their activities and give them advice and remote support that's time delayed. You know, usually you have about a 9 to 15 to 20 minute delay when you're talking to someone on Mars. And during my mission, it was 14 minutes. And so we had a mission rule that since we're in simulation protocol, we're not going to have phone calls or Zoom calls that are real time. If someone emails us, we wait 14 minutes to reply back. So usually you'd write the email and schedule it to send in 14 minutes in Gmail. But we try to keep that time delay as part of our simulation. But it's still very useful to get remote support. And we often would use email to ask a bunch of questions of our remote support team and get answers back within an hour, which was very useful to us. So you can imagine using VR in that same way, where it's a little bit time delayed, but you have a way to play back what the astronauts are doing. So those are the kind of things we're trying to show. Let me just show you one more video. So this is one that, this is one of a series that Aline was doing for the European Space Agency. She made 6 education and outreach videos, and this is one that she made with me to talk about the VR projects. So I was demoing it in the lower deck of the hab. You can see the monitor, the laptop right behind me, but this is our main VR app. This is the one that we've been working on for 6 years. That is a digital twin of our station. Now, the one I just was talking about that had the EVA map, that doesn't have all the content that's in this version, this earlier version. This one is meant to be a single user experience, and you can go get this on the Steam video game platform. We actually give this away. It's free, and it has all of the crew training that crews would normally learn to go stay at the station. And you can also see it has a bunch of information overlays. There's missions inside of it that take you through step by step what you're supposed to do. So in this example, I'm going into the station by entering the airlock and clicking the pressurized button and waiting a couple of minutes for that inner door to open, which is exactly what we would do on EVA when we were coming in and out of the station in simulation. And the rest of this training procedure here teaches you how to put on a suit. What are all the steps to prepare for an EVA? So things like put on your flight suit first. You know, you have to do that. And then you have to put on your boots. And then you have to put on the radio that you're going to use. You have to clip that to your ear. You have usually a little headset that you wear, and then you clip the radio physically to your chest. We usually have an EVA harness that we wear that holds the radio and can hold the Meshtastic devices as well. Then you do a little comm check. You know, EVA 1, this is Habcom. Do you read? Copy, I read you 5. That means I read you well. And then you put the backpack on. We have these backpacks and helmets that simulate a spacesuit. The backpack has some fans in it that blow air through some hoses into the helmet. So you hear the rush of air and you feel the air, and it keeps your helmet not foggy, and it kind of cools you down a little bit too in the desert. Then you put your gloves on, and then you're ready to go outside. You're ready to put your helmet on and go outside. And we would often help each other to do this. It's kind of a two-person job usually. But we also trained on how to take off the helmet and backpack quickly in an emergency. And you can see the VR app, has a lot of this training already, but we're going to add more to it now. And that's basically, that's the kind of stuff that we've been working on with the VR app. We wanted to show some of that end-to-end working in Utah. We did have some issues with the Oculus Meta Quest headsets. Had 4 of them there in Utah, couldn't set up a couple of them. I ended up doing the demo with the crew with just one of them. So we never got to kind of have all 4 of us put on a headset and plan out the EVA together that we were hoping to do, but hopefully we'll do that next time. And I'm planning to go down there next week as part of the University Rover Challenge and try that out with a couple people. So anyway, that's kind of my presentation for tonight. I'm happy to take any questions. There's a lot of stuff we did I didn't touch on. I definitely recommend you read our mission summary. And I just put that link in the chat. There's a research report in there that's even longer that talks about all the science reports. One of the really fun ones I just want to mention briefly is we had an experiment to grow tomato plants in Martian regolith simulant, as well as Utah soil that we'd gotten out on EVA, and some control soil, which was just basically potting soil you get from a grocery store or Fred Meyer or somewhere. We used spirulina to try to grow the tomato seeds. And I'm happy to say that we grew a tomato seed in the Martian regolith simulant. That was a first for the MDRS program. And the same tomato plant didn't grow in the Utah soil, showing that the Mars soil is a better medium for plant growth, or at least that type of tomato plant and that type of soil we used. So with that, I will take any questions.
So how does spirulina grow a seed? How does that work?
So spirulina is blue-green algae. It's a microorganism, right? And what scientists have found in recent years is that you could use it to fertilize regular plants. You could use it as like a food source, a nutrient source for regular plants to grow. And one of the experiments that Cecile was doing was called biostimulation, where she was measuring the growth of different plants using spirulina and not using spirulina. But essentially, we use spirulina to give the Martian regolith simulant, which is from the Mojave Desert. It's called MMS-1. It's made by Martian Garden. It was originally developed for the NASA Phoenix mission in 2007. So it was developed by JPL to simulate Mars soil. Now, it's not exactly what you would get if you just went out on Mars and picked up some soil, because that soil would have perchlorates in it. Perchlorates are really nasty chemicals that are caused by the sun's radiation beating down on Mars without any protection for millions of years. It's like pouring hydrogen peroxide on your skin. That's what perchlorates are. It's this chemical reaction. It's kind of nasty. But if you take that stuff out of the soil, and there's ways to do that, if you extract the perchlorates out and you just have this vanilla soil that's from Mars, it doesn't have any organics in it that we know of. But you could use it with spirulina, we've shown, to add some organics into the soil and get that carbon cycle going that plant roots need. The reason our tomato plants did not grow in the Utah soil is because the Utah soil was really mucky. You put some water on it and it would just all congeal together. And there was no little like pockets in the soil for carbon and water to saturate the plant roots and move around. It's called the carbon cycle. There's a great documentary called Kiss the Soil, narrated by Woody Harrelson, that talks about the carbon cycle of plants and agriculture and how most agriculture practices in the world don't understand how important that is for plants. But we did. We talked about that a lot, and we saw that the Martian regolith, because it was made up of little tiny pebbles, that was a better medium for the plant roots to take hold in for the tomato plant we used.
Cool. So you actually had tomato plants and you got tomatoes that had seeds in them.
We had cherry tomato mature plants that were going in the greenhouse. We also had mint, sage, and salad greens and basil. Those were the 5 plants we had in the greenhouse. And we were harvesting those throughout the 2-week mission. We were using those to supplement our meals, like putting cherry tomatoes on our salad, for example. But what we did with this specific Mars regolith experiment is she took seeds of the tomato plant, just the seeds, and tried to get them to germinate.
Got it.
And the Utah soil could never germinate them, but the Mars soil did. So she's going to write this up. She's also doing some follow-up work now at her lab in Belgium. Any other questions? Yes, Michael Patrick's hands up.
Just out of curiosity, I don't know why this, simulation in general, whatever, and what sparked the idea was your safety person. Is how do you simulate danger, and especially life-threatening danger? And has any conversation been given to that, like, random accident happened, because your behavior changes substantially according to the consequence. Anyone that's, done a tightrope walk over a chasm or something, your entire brain changes in how you do things according to the consequences of your actions, etc. Have the Mars Society explored how you might incorporate that sort of thing?
Yes, we actually did stuff like that during our mission. We did some safety drills. We did some emergency training for the crew members on how to remove the helmets and backpacks in an emergency. We did 2 specific safety drills that we planned out, where Aline, the first one, she pretended to get sick, although what was weird is she actually did get nauseous during the safety drill and did get lightheaded. So it kind of turned into a real situation a little bit. But they went on an EVA, and she said that she smelled burnt plastic inside her helmet. And another crew member said, "I smell like a sulfur smell right now." Yeah. And so she ended up, they took her helmet off, and she kind of was like gonna faint, and they brought her back. And it was a little emotionally charged when they came back in the hab. We were all making sure she was okay, and she was fine. But then the second drill we did was on the last day. We did a safety drill. Aline and I took out a rover, the 2 leaders of the mission. We left everyone else back in the hab, and we turned off our radio, and we drove somewhere different than where we said we were going to go. So we had no comms. We did not turn on the Garmin navigation either. And then so we got out to this place that no one had ever been before, and we sent the SOS ping on the Garmin. And then we just waited to see what would happen, and waited to see what they would do. And our crew rallied, the 5 of them. It was emotionally charged. They did not know it was a drill. They thought we were in trouble, like maybe we'd flipped a rover or something. And they didn't have radio comms, so they couldn't reach us on the radio. Within about 5 minutes, we could hear a drone flying. So they were looking for us with the drone, and they found us. And then they got there. 2 of them got there in a rover in 20 minutes. And we were 2 kilometers away from the hab. So that was a really successful test. Now, they were a little upset when they first walked up that it was a drill. But once they calmed down after that, and we went back and we debriefed everyone, it was a really positive experience. It really showed that the crew worked well together. They quickly decided who was going to go rescue us. They knew to break sim and not put on suits. They knew to get the med kit, because they didn't know what to expect. So they grabbed the whole med kit and took it with them. And they were flying the drone. They were actually, one of the 2 crew members was in the rover on the way to us, flying the drone at the same time. And they did find us. And yeah, we were really happy how that went. But that was an example of us trying to use normal safety drills and safety procedures that you would use in a place like the French Guiana launch site to train crew and prepare for situations that everyone should be ready for. So that when people do face a real situation, they don't panic and not know what to do and make the situation worse.
So did it reveal anything about non-radio fallbacks for signaling, like there's dust in the atmosphere, so having a laser pointing upwards would help locate, the searchlight up into the mist. Or I don't know, can you fly a kite on Mars to get an antenna up above the terrain?
Yeah, you could do a high altitude balloon or a kite to some extent. It would have to be pretty well designed because there's not a lot of air thickness on Mars. It's about 1/1000th of the Earth. But there are ways, and her wind rover was designed to be propelled by the Martian wind, and it would work. So yeah, there's ways you could do that. Well, we found we had a lot of different outcomes and insights of our different activities in EVAs, and each night we had reports we had to write. So almost every day we were learning new things, and we were documenting them and sending those out in the reports for not only us, but for future crews to reference. But yeah, one of the findings that I already mentioned is we can solve the lack of radio comms by having devices like the Garmins and the Meshtastics available. And that would give situational awareness to the people back at the hab. And even, if we hadn't turned off our radio and turned off the Garmin nav, having that would have given them an instant awareness of where we were. So that was definitely a key finding, a key insight of our mission. Yeah, Matt.
Hey, James. Did you have a safety drill in place where maybe one of your crew members themselves maybe became disorientated and they themselves became more of a threat to the mission, and maybe carrying out your procedure, what you would do in that case? Did you include that? I guess that's one of two questions I have.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely something that happens out in Utah. Is you get out there, and people that are even friends that know each other from maybe go to university together, get out to Utah, and they're in a different environment, and they get stressed, and the weather's harsh, and they're dehydrated, and they're fatigued, and sort of the claws and the fangs start coming out at people. That's normal, actually. Our crew, we took extra pains to communicate with each other and check in on each other and health check each other, especially when we were out in EVAs. We did frequent health checks of, are you thirsty? Do you need to rest? We definitely had some interpersonal tension sometimes. Like we early on in the mission, we had one crew member that just was really excited to talk, and English was not her first language. We had 4 members of the crew that were French, that had thick French accents. And this particular one was just eager to talk and often talked over people and interrupted people. And one of the other crew members really didn't like that and got visibly emotional a bunch of times. And so when I saw that happening, I was like, time out, everyone. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about being respectful with our communication, making sure, especially when we're using the radios, that we're not talking over each other, because then nobody can hear anything over the radio. If you're doing that, you need to talk with short sentences and address who you're talking to and make sure that they're receiving your communication. That was important with just the radios, but also just each other inside the hab. And so we took extra pains to talk about that and practice that. And by the end of the mission, we were all working together very well. Whenever someone needed help, we were all swarming to help each other. There's things like we have to do the dishes and cook meals and things like that. And usually you rotate who does that, so everyone kind of has to do it a little bit. But what we found is a lot of us like to cook, or a lot of us wanted to help do the dishes after the meal. And so we never really had to pick on someone to do it. Everyone was just helping out and pitching in. And it was a great feeling of gratitude that we were all there together. We all bonded. Those are lifelong friends I'm going to have for the rest of my life. And we just worked really well together. And so whenever there were, times when a crew member was overwhelmed and maybe was a little short with someone else, we all checked on them and made sure they were okay. And so in the end, it was really great.
So in your training for the mission, did you guys do any EMS radio protocol, like cops, firemen, etc., the standard stuff on being on a network?
No, a lot of crews do that differently. We do have a handbook that every crew reads that has a lot of the program-wide procedures. but there's not a lot about radio comms in there, like what you were just mentioning. There are specific procedures that people learn in EMS and police and fire. That's not really what we do. It's not what our crew did. Our crew, we acted more like astronauts, and we would do a lot of comm checks with each other just to make sure that the radios were working whenever we were losing sight of the HAB. We did frequent comm checks about the condition of the rovers and the battery level they had, because one of the things we were trying to do was make sure we could do these long traverses and figure out which were the best of the 4 rovers for us to take to do those. And so we would do quite frequent checks of what the rover battery levels were as we were driving them. We also made sure we always had comms with each other. And there were lots of times when I was out on EVA with someone, but we didn't have any comms with the station anymore, but we still needed to talk to each other to coordinate what we were doing. And so we spent time making sure that everyone knew how to do that, knew how to switch between the different radio channels on the radio. There was only a couple to switch from, but still it was like a little dial that was kind of hard to do with gloves on, and you can't always see it because your helmet's on. So we learned how to do that, and we learned how to use the repeater and not when to use the repeater for the radios as well, because there was a 1-second delay, and it wasn't always useful to have, and it wasn't always a better comm channel than the no repeater. So those are all the things we sort of learned and figured out while we were there.
So what time of year were you there?
We were just there earlier this month. Our mission was May 1st through 12th.
So it's not yet getting super hot. But...
No, it was hot. It was 70s and sometimes on low 80s, but it was also windy in the almost every afternoon and evening, and it would cool down to like 40 at night because it is the desert. There's wild temperature swings.
Kirsty's got her hand up, has had her hand up for a little bit.
Hi, sorry, this is just a quick question, but were you limited to the food that was grown in the lab, or did you have a stock of food? And did you ever run out of food? Was there some kind of issues along those lines?
We had some shelf-stable food in addition to what was in the green hab. The green hab was just a small amount of the food we had. We usually would eat things like rice and pasta. We have dehydrated vegetables, dehydrated meats that are really interesting. They're these cans of products that are like shelf stable for 30 years in some cases. And all you have to do is take it out and put it in a bowl and put some water on it. And you have like fresh broccoli, or you have like ground beef crumbles. And it's really this interesting product. They're kind of expensive, but you can't get them just on Amazon and other places. You know, there are a lot of the kind of things that preppers have in case of emergencies in their basement, you know, stuff like that. So we had those shelf stable things. We also had just regular products from Walmart, like pastas, and I got like a couple jambalaya rice mixes, and that was a popular thing because, you know, Louisiana cuisine is both French and American. So I was trying to do some of that when it was my turn to cook. I also did taco night a few times. That was a hit because a lot of the French people, they're not used to Mexican food, spicy food, Tex-Mex. So, but I would find ways to make stuff like that with the shelf-stable ingredients we had. We had a couple of fresh things we brought with us. Like we did bring 24 eggs, but we did also have this egg powder in a can that was like pretty good. It was like 80% as good as a fresh egg. And so one of the French folks made crepes a lot. And that was popular. But yeah, we live quite comfortably. For cooking with a bunch of like pantry supplies, canned tuna. I had some like smoked oysters in a can in like a, you know, prepackaged thing. Those were a hit. But yeah, French people, they could do some magic things with just rice and peas and carrots.
And you didn't have to survive on potatoes.
We did not have to survive on potatoes. We had some potatoes, but it was not like the Mark Watney plan. Yes, Matt.
Yes, regarding improving from mission to mission, are you like from mission to mission? Are the missions being optimized overall? The processes that improve it from the data you gather, or is there data points that are like significant that you say to yourselves, maybe we better try this like at the onset of the mission, or this is a significant, is it like, how big is the improvement from mission to mission?
Yeah, that's a great question. The way the program is run, there's about 12 to 15 crews we have per year, okay? All those crews are different types of crews. They're from different universities. In some cases, they're professionals like us. They often have their own research they're bringing and doing. Like there was a crew from the Aerospace Corporation this year, and they had some research projects kind of like ours that were different ones that the Aerospace Corporation was trying to do and some of the other partners they have. For the most part, though, our crews are students in university, and they're practicing some of this stuff, but they're not really gathering scientific data to the level that we were doing. And so one of the things that I'd like to see us do at the Mars Society with this program is have some research themes that each of the crews are trying to work towards. So one of the examples of this was we had a behavioral study where we did this nightly survey, and we had an opportunity to journal a little bit if we wanted to do that as individual crew members. And I found that very useful to take this survey about how I'd handled things that day and then journal a little bit. Because I was experiencing some pretty deep emotions on this mission. There was one level of I was proud to be doing it. I'm the commander. It's my first mission as commander. We've been planning this for 3 years. I'm with people that are like me, that are also Mars crazy people and do it professionally and do things with the Mars Society. So I was with a bunch of people that I really liked. We were doing something I loved doing. So there was that kind of happiness, deep happiness, but there was also, on my last mission, there was a crew member that was more senior than me. I was a rookie on my first mission, and he taught me a lot of the ways of doing these, like how to put the suits on, how to do the EVAs, and he actually worked on the backpacks. He passed away last year, tragically, in a car accident. And so I was constantly getting reminded of him, especially the first part of the mission, when I was showing people how to do EVAs and how to put the suit on, and kind of fresh in my mind what he taught me, where I was now teaching someone else. And so when it was my turn to go out in EVA as commander for the first time, I dedicated the EVA to him. I said, his name was Max Boyce, and I said, I'm dedicating my first EVA as commander to Max Boyce. Max, I've been thinking about you a lot today. I'll be carrying your memory all the way to Mars. And I blogged about that as well, like put some social media posts out about that. And all of the folks that were on my mission last time, as well as his family and friends, saw it. And so I was kind of constantly getting some communications about that. So the first few days of the mission. So kind of I was switching between happiness and like the loss of my friend who just died last year. It was still very fresh, and kind of doing what he used to do, that he was really good at. And then it was also, there were challenges of just getting everyone working together initially and adjusting to the harsh environment. You're out in the desert, it's dry heat, everyone's dehydrated from the flights they took to get to Utah already, but then you get out in the desert and you're even more dehydrated. So one of the things I did is I brought these little, these are Tom Brady TB12 electrolyte packets. These are flavored green tea. I also have a lemonade here. So these were a super huge hit among the crew because it kept them hydrated. You have water, but you have one of those and it really supercharges the water, so the hydration comes back. But we also planned a rest day because on day 7 of the 12-day sim, we were all exhausted. We planned a rest day and we took it. We didn't plan any EVAs that day. And then we got back at it the next Monday, but we were all really fatigued still. So Tuesday, we took another half day off. And then, toward the end of the mission, I think we were all, we loved what we were doing, but we were all pretty tired because we were packed a lot in at that point. And so anyway, those were all the things we were juggling, the emotions of it all. But what was great was that, just to bring it back to your question, that behavioral study was one that every crew does. And so that researcher is able to see results over several crews. So it's really all about planning the experiment, right? Not necessarily what the crews are going to do individually. So I'd like to see is have the program have some research objectives, you know, and then have the crews plug into that with their own activities. I think that's the way to go.
Did you guys do any briefing on the Utah climate? Because that place can really kill you in half an hour if you're not super conscious of your hydration levels, and that slot canyon territory is incredibly dangerous. If you have normal perception, you know, because of the rounded forms,
Yes.
you can get yourself over the edge a lot easier than you would, you know, like here in the Pacific Northwest. So
Yeah,
did all of you have a background on that, or was a
No, we didn't have
safety briefing?
We didn't have a background on it, and many of the crew had never been out to Utah before.
Wow.
I think I was the only one actually. And Chris Davidson has been out to the Southwest, but she hadn't been out to that part of Utah before. But the other folks, the other 5 or 6, you know, 5, yeah, they were new to Utah. So we certainly talked about it ahead of time. Where I tried to explain to them what it's like in the desert, how much the temperature swings go, how it takes your body 3 or 4 days to really acclimate to it. And
Yeah.
even then, you're not fully acclimated because it's not a really natural environment for people. The temperature swings are crazy. You know, it'll be super hot, then it'll be super cold within the space of a couple hours. And so just making sure you have enough gear to stay warm or stay cool. But I think we all, for the most part, did well with that. We were prepared, and we had 3 years to prepare. And we had many Zoom calls to talk about everything.
So is NASA and the other space agencies in the feedback loop? What's the Mars Society's relationship, you know, via the science you do and their programs, et cetera?
Well, we started this program to get NASA's attention, because when we started it, you know, in the late 90s, NASA was not working on humans to Mars, and it was actually forbidden for NASA scientists to work on that because it wasn't budgeted in the late 90s. So they started working on the robotic missions to Mars, but there was no human factors research done, human mission planning done. In fact, it was kind of forbidden. So there was this whole Mars underground people that were doing that, you know, and that's how the Mars Society started. We formed out of that Mars underground in the 80s and early 90s. And we started the research stations to try to get NASA's attention of, this is what you guys should be doing to get ready for Mars. I'm happy to say that Johnson Space Center now has a Mars analog. It is more of an isolation experiment, not what we do out in Utah. One of the philosophies that we have that's different than the NASA and the Russian Mars research is we don't believe in sticking people in a can for 500 days like they did in Russia. That's called an isolation experiment. And it's usually a medical experiment, not really a Mars operations experiment. We don't think that that's what's going to happen when people go to Mars. We think when the crew lands on Mars, they're going to explore a large area. Over the course of a year, they might explore an area the size of France with 4 to 6 people using rovers and air power. And so that's what we simulate out in Utah is those longer exploration missions. But NASA is now finally doing Mars analog research at Johnson Space Center. It only took them 20 years. And we're happy that they're doing it. And there's a lot of other analogs that have started up. We have the first 2. And the MDRS is the most successful and had the most crew members and crews by far, by like an order of magnitude. But there are many other analogs now. There's one in Hawaii called High Seas that was affiliated with NASA. It's a lunar analog, but we did a crew-to-crew Zoom link up during our mission for the first time between the 2. That was fun. And there's also one in Mongolia that's getting spun up that we're consulting on, has funding from the president of Mongolia. And they're going to have an analog in the Gobi Desert that could possibly be a mobile analog to build on their nomadic culture, to be able to explore different areas of the Gobi by packing up the base and moving it. And there's many others around the world that are out there, but they're not always run academically and research focused like ours is. Ours is kind of an academic program where you have to apply and get accepted. Others are run more like tourism, where you just have to pay and you'll get on the schedule. So we run ours a little differently, but we work with all those analog, other analog stations and teams, because we all are one big analog research community, and it's going to take us all working together to get to Mars. I mean, that's my personal philosophy. So, at the Mars Society, we want to make sure that we're talking to everyone and that we're helping out where we can.
But one of the things I'm curious about, the long-term mission is interior decoration, and how does each crew to your HAB leave their mark on the HAB for the next crew? Because like if you get on a Navy ship, like an aircraft carrier, a cruiser, or whatever, and you go down into the berthing spaces and machinery spaces, these sailors are artists. They leave, there's mural art down there that over literally, some of these ships have been sailing for 4 or 5 decades now. And literally the history is painted on the walls in some of those spaces. So are you doing anything similar to that?
Unfortunately, we don't do that. We kind of try to reset the station between crews. We don't let them like put things on the walls or carve their initials anywhere. That would deteriorate our facilities pretty fast if we allow people to do that. What we do, though, is every year we do some more work on the station to make it better. We do upgrades to the station every year. This past year, we put in a whole new water system that has 3 levels of filtration and is way better than the system we used to have, where we had multiple water tanks that were sort of filling each other and we had to monitor them all. Now it's all sort of like what you'd have in a house. We still have a big water tank outside that we have to fill up for every crew. So every crew does conserve water. They get about 120 gallons for a 2-week mission for 6 or 7 people. So we do try to be mindful of how much water we're using. We take quick Navy showers, and we don't overly run the water when we're washing dishes. But our crew found we were right on that trend line. It wasn't that hard to conserve water and be comfortable and do everything you normally could do as an American. I think coming back, I'm very mindful of how much we consume as Americans, not just water, but everything, and how the rest of the world doesn't really operate that way. And maybe we shouldn't either.
Is there any water recycling in that?
Not really. A little bit in the science dome, but not really. We don't really have a great water tank. Yeah. Any other questions? Manuel, did you have a question, or did we get you already?
I do. I have a question. You mentioned EVAs, and that situational awareness is very important, and safety is very important, and meaning that you rely on safety critical systems to do your operations. Do you consider cybersecurity for this at all? Because the reason I ask is because a cybersecurity attack could have a significant impact in your operations.
Yes. We don't really have to worry about that too much, because this facility is so far away from anything. We have satellite internet through Starlink. We used to have HughesNet before we had Starlink. That was very slow and very bandwidth limited. So Starlink was a great upgrade for us. But the nature of it is we basically just have the Starlink downlink, and we're using everything locally, talking to each other, but there's no way to have someone walk up and hack the Wi-Fi or anything like that. There's nobody.
Well, I can tell you there's multiple ways to do it. Nowadays you have teenagers that can, with a software-defined radio, they can hack basically anything. That's the reason I'm asking.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we do have a router with normal security on it, an Orbi router. So it wouldn't sound like the Wi-Fi is totally wide open, but but it is kind of open. We kind of made it that way so that we could use it. So but we do watch when people come in the vicinity of the station. It's not, there's signs up everywhere for them to not trespass and not to come into the perimeter of the research station. And we have a place where our front gate is, our sign, that people can park at and like watch the station. And that's too far away, I think, for them to use the Wi-Fi. But you're right, if there's ways to use radio frequency.
Yeah.
Probably should look into that.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious to see if cybersecurity was part of your risk management strategy or something.
I think overall it is for the Mars Society. Certainly we do things for that, but for the station, we use some cloud resources on our mission to like share photos and things, and that was, you know, commercial stuff like Google Photos. So that was, you know, normal security practices.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That was a good one.
I had another question about the rovers. So
Yeah.
they're battery powered. I
Yes.
remember in the case for Mars, Zubrin had written about methane powered vehicles. Is the use of the battery powered an evolutionary choice, or is it that, well, we might use methane powered, we're just not using it in this scenario?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have electric rovers because they have limited range. We're not trying to have people go off for days in a rover, like Mark Watney would do. They're really meant for traverses within an afternoon, like maybe 3 or 4 kilometers out and back. So the batteries are strong enough on 2 of the rovers out of the 4 to go about 4 to 5 kilometers on a single charge. And we have a mission rule that once it gets to 60%, you have to come back. Not 50, not less than that. It has to be 60. So so that there's enough buffer for you to come all the way back. And because these battery readings are not super accurate, we would see, like, it'd be at 100, we'd drive it off the campus and it'd already be at 95. And then it'd stay at 95 for like 20 minutes. And then it would drop down to 93. You know, it was very inconsistent, those battery readings. So the mission rule is 60%. So the ones we have are called Polaris Ranger EVs. They're commercial off-road vehicles, 2-seater with a little cargo bay in the back. You could put a suited astronaut in there for an emergency if you needed to. But they're big enough that 2 of us can ride in them with suits on. We used to have a rover that was a combustion engine. It was an old APC, armored personnel carrier, and it had a door like a DeLorean that would open up, and you could have like 3 people in suits get out. So that was a pretty handy vehicle. I'm wondering if we can create something like that again. On Mars, you would have the methane and internal combustion engines, as Zubrin mentioned in his book, just because you'd want those to be long range.
Yeah.
You probably would have solar on them as well, just for the electronics. But yeah, and there's also, you could have RTG powered rovers too, you know,
Yep.
Nuclear, small nuclear reactors in them, essentially. But we have the Polaris EVs mostly because that's what we're trying to simulate is a first landing, a first crew that's exploring a small area. Any other questions?
Cool. Well, if we've got no other questions, we could do a little bit of show and tell. Can I start?
Sounds great.
We were talking about the dehydrated food, and I was down in Albuquerque, New Mexico last week for the State of the Space Industrial Base conference. And there's actually a company called Danny's Rocket Ranch that was a representative of the Space Drinks Society. Didn't know such a thing existed. And they had a Marsarita mix. Oh, it's hard to see. Yeah, you do have to bring your own alcohol, but it's a powdered dehydrated margarita mix. They also do salsa. So if you wanted to keep that Mexican theme going wherever you backpack, whether it's in Utah or Mars, you can do that.
Very cool. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool camping products out there that I was looking at when I was getting ready for the mission, that where you could really, do a lot of really cool cooking and live quite comfortably out in the wilderness.
You're on mute, Michael. Still on mute. There you go.
Okay. What's your arrangement as far as the land that you guys explore on? Is that BLM or a private holding, or who are your neighbors, etc.?
Yeah, it is BLM land for the most part. Most of the map I showed is public land that there are other people out there usually doing ATVs and things. You're not allowed to off-road in that part of Utah, or really I think anywhere in Utah. You have to stay on marked roads. The land that we have the campus on, the 1 square kilometer around that, is state land that we're leasing for $1 a year. So we have a lease for that, but then all the land around us is BLM land, federally administered public land. And Utah as a state, 80% of Utah is either federal or state public land or national parks. It's quite amazing. And that county that we're in, Wayne County, is one of the most underprivileged and least populated counties in America. And so after I've had a few talks like this since the mission ended. The first one I did was the night after the mission ended. I gave a lecture in the next town over called Torrey, Utah. It's about an hour away. And it was a talk at this place called the Entrada Institute. And the mayor of the town was there, and it was like 60 people there. They were waiting for one of us from the Mars Society to give a talk there for several years. And so I had the privilege, and it was right after my mission, so it was fresh. And it went really well. I really had a good experience doing that. But one of the things I talked about was we really want to build some inroads into your community. And I've read your economic development plan for your county, and one of the things that it says is there should be a natural history museum in Hanksville, which is the town that we're closest to, and there should be more housing for young families, and there should be more sources of water. And so actually I'd like to help the Mars Society, and I would like to help with all 3 of those things, I told them. So that I think that helped build some bridges with the community just that evening. And when I'm actually going to go back down there next week for another event called the University Rover Challenge that we have at the station every year, where we have about 30 teams of students from different universities around the world have built Mars rovers, and they bring them to Utah and compete this time every year. And so I'll be there all next week, and I'm going to have some follow-up meetings with the mayor of that town, as well as some of the county officials, and hopefully see how the Mars Society can be good citizens of that area and help out. Yes, Matt.
Yes. Any thoughts on like how you could simulate a dust storm on Mars? Because I'm not sure Utah, the timing is always enough to have that type of power.
Well, we saw dust devils. In fact, I saw a couple while I had the suit on and was driving a rover, and I was like, all right, I'm fine. I'm actually having a real experience now of Mars, because these dust devils are little tornadoes, and one of them kicked up right in front of me. So yeah, there actually are dust storms there, and we were lucky enough. We had a lot of wind, but we didn't have a real dust storm there. But it is possible out there in Utah to have those type of events. And on Mars, there's ones that are global, that last for years in some cases. In fact, when the Viking mission got to Mars in '75, which was the first 2 landers that were successful. There were 2 orbiters and 2 landers. And there was a Soviet mission that arrived that same year. The Soviet mission was automated. So there was this global dust storm happening, and the Soviet mission just plunged itself right into Mars, you know, because they had no way to stop it. It was automated. But the US orbiters and landers waited for the dust storm to be over, and then they dropped the landers. So yeah, it is a real issue on Mars, and something that the crews are going to have to deal with and have ways to stay safe. Any other questions, guys? Or any other show and tells? Oh, you got another one, Matt? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess when your crew did fly in and I guess you had the benefit of having a half day off, that sort of thing, would you have that leeway in a real Mars mission? Or like, is all your like supplies, is everything like rationed that you could have that type of leeway and have some slack for cases like that?
Well, just to be clear, we had a rest day and we took another half day, but we were always in sim during that. We had a set amount of food and water, and we didn't never get resupplied. So we were conscious of what we were consuming the whole mission. And yeah, on Mars, it would be the same thing. You would sort of have a set of supplies when you landed, and maybe there's some resupply coming from Earth at some point, but what you got is what you got. You know, you can, in some cases, make some resources on Mars. If you drilled for water, you could have water to drink, you could have air from the water, you could even make methane, CH4 from the hydrogen in the water and carbon dioxide from the air on Mars. So there's things you can make on Mars, but you're not going to be able to make like food and supplies very easily on the first couple missions. So yeah, you are going to be highly aware of what you have in your inventory and what you're consuming, and making sure you don't run out of anything.
So when is the Mars Society going to put in place a pocket nuclear reactor to supply energy?
That's actually, so one of the questions that we had tonight was mission critical systems, right? And power is a mission critical system. As a matter of fact, we had our solar array was having some intermittent outages, and it would happen, and all the experiments would shut off. So like the bioreactor, the photobioreactor that grew spirulina, we would have to go turn that back on and make sure it was okay. And I had intended to install a file server, just a regular Synology NAS file server that we could run some application loads on. We would use it to store files, and it would be a hybrid cloud, and it would post the files up to the real cloud. But we would also have things like a Marscoin node for the Marscoin cryptocurrency blockchain. And we would have other things running on that server. And because of the power outages we were having, we could never put that server into operation. And so we couldn't do our voting simulation that we wanted to do. We wanted to have a little governance on Mars thing where we had the inventory and the e-voting on the blockchain, like you'd have on Mars someday. And we couldn't do that because we didn't have consistent power. So to have democracy on Mars, you have to have 24/7 power. That's what we found. And so and power would also be needed for life support. So it is a critical piece of the system. And the way that I believe the first Mars settlements will deal with power is they will have a small nuclear reactor. There's a team that was at Los Alamos, and now they have a private company called spacenukes.com, where they were working on a reactor called Krusty that would be a small nuclear reactor that could be used on Mars. And we're talking about ways we can not necessarily have that literally, but simulate that by having solar with some other redundant power sources, like maybe a wind turbine in addition to the solar. So we would have about as much as you would have with a nuclear reactor, and it would be always on. We do have a solar array with batteries, but one of the challenges we have right now is it's not always charging and draining the batteries smartly. So one of the things that Julian, our crew engineer, did while he was there was put in more monitoring of all that. And the idea that eventually we could have a smart grid where the loads on the power system could know how much solar power is being generated and adjust themselves. So like, for example, the photobioreactor could have run at 50% power, and it knew, he programmed it to, based on the solar cycle, to not draw more than 50% during the night when the solar array wasn't charging the batteries. So things like that, we'd like to put more into place. But the challenge right now with the power system we have is that it's not as reliable for being able to do those things and just to stay on all the time.
Well, we're looking like we're right at time. And if I can share my screen just one last time, I'll give you the heads up for next month. Next meetup is Thursday, June 29th. We are always the last Thursday of the month. We're going to have Kevin Lally from Hydrosat talking about Hydrosat and maybe talking about something else. Little preview there. He's been working on an AI LLM-based project that he calls SatGPT. Hopefully he'll be ready to talk about that. Even if he doesn't, Hydrosat's really interesting and it's going to be a great night, and I hope you all join us then. So with that, we'll see you next time. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
you.
everybody.